After Hours is brought to you by The Hourglass. The Hourglass, advancing watch culture across Asia Pacific for over 45 years. Michel Nydegger, thank you for joining me for the Man of the Hour podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
So this is the episode which, in some ways, almost gave me the most heart attacks, right? And well, I mean, I guess probably because it meant a lot to me from a personal perspective, but also because from a creative perspective, this had a lot of variables I couldn't control. And I think it began, I was in Dubai with my wife, Vivi, and I got on the phone with you, and I think you said, hey, I have this idea. I want to shoot this episode, but I don't really care that much about showing any watches. And
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Okay, yeah.
tell me about that, because I thought that that was simultaneously incredibly courageous. Actually, I kind of loved it, but also terrified me, you know?
Okay, okay, I understand. I didn't realize it was a bit weird. No, but I just figured I didn't want it to be promotional in any way because how many times have we seen like look at this watch and and it's fantastic and explaining it. It's always kind of it's just more of the same. And I figured it would be cool to just spend some time together basically and. In the end, it's always the people behind the watches which kind of explain why the watches are the way they are. And so I figured it would be a great moment to kind of do something a little bit different, I guess.
So I love that you suggested that. And when I, kind of, sat down and thought about it a little bit afterwards, I was like, actually, it's really cool because it kind of compels us to focus entirely on the human story. But that brought about a second challenge, which, I love going this motorcycle kind of odyssey with you. But the human story for me is Robert and Stephen. And maybe in particular Robert because no one had really seen him for 2 decades, right? I mean, he's kind of like this mysterious character, an incredible creator, obviously, but a guy who is, I like to call him kind of the J.D. Salinger or Howard Hughes of the watch industry.
Right, right.
He's amazingly accomplished and yet almost a complete mystery because he almost never appears in public. I mean, tell me a little bit about that and why it is that he's a little bit reticent to appear in public.
You know what? I've never really asked myself that question. Like he's always been like that, and given the relationship that we had, it's not something that I was that seemed weird to me. It's just like that's how he is. I do remember like early on when we did some photo shoot where we wanted a picture of Robert and Stephen together. And I remember that was so difficult to accomplish because, and it's a basic thing which you need to do. But I think there's only like a handful of pictures where they're together in the same frame. So it was always a huge success when we got that. And also I remember when we finished the handmade one, Robert was super proud of that accomplishment, and he said, we should do like a sort of picnic or a party for the team. And we set everything up and all that, and he just didn't show up, right? But it was always like part of it, and he does need to be, as you've seen at his farm, he does need to be in a certain space in order to kind of be able to express himself creatively. But me personally, it was always that was just normal, basically.
It's a very interesting sort of component of creativity as well. I mean, again, I kind of make the analogy with J.D. Salinger, who is also, notoriously a recluse. I think Stanley Kubrick, one of my favorite film directors, was exactly the same way as well.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, in fact, he also like refused to travel, right? But he also made a movie about the Vietnam War. so he basically shot Full Metal Jacket. The second half of it is set in Vietnam, but he shot it in England where he lived, which I find remarkable, right? And then there's his final film, which is called Eyes Wide Shut, which is the movie with Tom Cruise and Nicole
I
Kidman.
remember that. Yeah.
And all those scenes of Tom Cruise walking around New York, he basically shot them with Tom Cruise walking on a treadmill, and he projected New York on the background,
No way. I did not realize that at all. Okay. Okay.
which is crazy because it's such an old school movie technique, and yet somehow it works, And I guess with, Robert and Stephen, because I never really did. I think I shook hands with him once somewhere around. I think it was at the stand that they used to take in the old Basel Fair, which was kind of adjacent to the HCI booth, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I shook hands with him briefly just after he'd launched the double tourbillon 30 degrees
So that was really early on, right? That must have been, I guess, 2004 then.
yeah, just around there, 04, 05. And then actually ever since then, I never saw him, and I know it's funny because you had mentioned that sometimes people even question you as to if he's real, right?
Yeah, yeah, because what they said is that, a lot of brands, there's always two names, like Patek Philippe or Vacheron Constantin and all those, and they figured that, oh, Stephen must have thought that, there needs to be a second name, and so that's why we just invented someone. But no,
Right.
Robert is very real.
But that would be hilarious, though, if Steven was somehow this mastermind that created this fictional character, and then he was smart enough to even put the name before his as well.
Yeah, yeah, it would be.
Which, incidentally, we should also mention that we absolutely love Stephen Forsey as well, and it was really cool to have him be part of the show. Okay, but let's talk a little bit about the background of the brand, right? So one of the things that we wanted to talk about in the show and in the episode was how the Swiss watch industry was almost decimated after the launch of quartz technology, right? And also one thing that I having now gone to Tokyo and kind of visited the Seiko Museum, one of the misconceptions I always had was that it was the Japanese who kind of like pummeled the Swiss watch industry. Seiko created the Astron, the first successful quartz watch. But to be fair, also, the Swiss were also working on that technology, and they had Beta 21 also, right? Seiko beat them to market. But what was crazy was that Seiko open sourced the tech and then basically allowed all these kind of, okay, I might as well just say it, Chinese and Hong Kong, cheap electronic watches to flood the market. And it was primarily that which caused this decimation of the Swiss watch industry. And then, now we talk about I guess the 80s and really the 90s where mechanical watchmaking is coming back, right? The kind of year that we look at a lot as watch lovers is 1989 when Philippe Stern creates the Caliber 89 for the 150th anniversary of Patek Philippe. And it kind of announces that mechanical watchmaking is back, right? But also for, now it's being kind of appreciated in particular for its artistic value since we don't really need them watches as precision instruments that much anymore, right? So did Robert ever tell you about his early days when he was at Renault Papi?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, from what you said, I guess there's two things with the electronic watch crisis. That just meant that there was probably almost like a full generation of people who were not handed down the skills that they would need in traditional watchmaking. But then also regardless of that, there was no R&D being done anyway in Swiss watchmaking. So it was kind of, you have your kind of movement and then you keep doing more of the same. And so that's what Robert and Stephen found when they were at Renault Papi back in the day, where they were working already on very complicated pieces. And they saw that, yes, a lot of skills had already disappeared or were disappearing. But at the same time, there was nothing significantly new which was being added within the context of the history of watchmaking. So that was kind of their goal to try to add something which was very different and which would add value. So it wasn't about making a tourbillon for the sake of making a tourbillon. It was, let's make a tourbillon for the 21st century, which in terms of chronometric performance will actually add real value there. They left in 1999 to start Complytime. So initially, the idea was to be a supplier of high-end movements for different brands, which turned out to be the case later. But back then, with a double tourbillon, no one really seemed to appreciate what that was, what that meant. And that was actually the only reason that they started Greubel Forsey, because they believed in that first invention so much. And given the potential that they saw in it, they figured, it deserves its own sort of showcase. And at the same time, it was a good opportunity to bring back a certain level of hand finishing, which they hadn't seen, in a long time. Today, everyone talks about hand finishing. It's like one of the more important criteria by which you judge like the quality of a high-end watch. But back then, I mean, as you know better than I do, that was not even a thing at all. And so with that, that was their first timepiece, which was the double tourbillon 30 degrees. And given the success that they had at Basel World, they were like, oh, what can we do next and what can we do more? But it was never about starting a brand or having a brand. It was really about adding something significant to the history of watchmaking.
That is so cool, right? And so I love this also because, as you were saying, there's a kind of missing generation, right? Like a lost generation in watchmaking, because all the guys that should have been contributing in a very major way in the 70s and 80s, it were completely disrupted, and kind of to some degree the knowledge was and skill sets to create these extraordinary timepieces was almost lost. And so when you kind of come back into the 90s and you have the emergence of all these young guys like Stephen and Robert who are in love with complicated watchmaking, they're kind of having to kind of figure it out for themselves, right? And to reinterpret. Yeah, I mean, it's so cool. At the time, where they were working, and eventually Robert was working as a director and actually hired Stephen, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
At Renault Papi. This place is an absolute juggernaut in terms of being a pioneer in rebuilding complicated watchmaking.
Oh yeah, it's crazy. Like there's so many people who started there. It's quite something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts. You had Andreas Streller, you had Tony DeHaas, you had Carol Forrester, you had the Gronenfeld brothers,
Yeah.
and a seemingly endless array of just extraordinary watchmakers who are part of this generation, which is so cool. Right.
And each like in their own very specific and very different way, which is fantastic. It's not like, we kind of were schooled there and then we're all doing the same thing. Now between, well, I guess the brands today, you can say that you mentioned, it's very, very different in terms of the approach to watchmaking, which I found to be cool.
Amazing. And so after working on amazing projects like the Pour le Marie Tourbillon, Il Destrier Scufusia, the kind of grand comp for IWC, which I always love because it's built on a Valjoux 7750 base.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, okay.
Which I find
That's
remarkable.
cool.
Like they did a tourbillon repeater, split second chronograph, perpetual calendar on a Valjoux 7750, which I think is just remarkable. The Grand Petit Sonnery for AP as well.
Sure.
These guys strike out on their own, and it's fascinating to me to know that initially it was just like they wanted to be a supplier, but because no one got the double tourbillon, they were like, you know what, we're just going to create our own brand. Now, you mentioned something really interesting was they wanted to bring back hand finishing at the highest level. I'm going to put it out there, actually, that I would say that they didn't bring it back. They basically invented it, right?
Okay.
They're kind of like Robert and Stephen are like the inventors of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, right? Like there was normal jiu-jitsu, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I got you. Yeah.
But they brought it to a different level because I'm trying to think of really complicated watches from an era before Greubel Forsey, and I can't think of any. I think the watch that everyone thinks about in terms of being extraordinarily well finished is Dufour's Simplicity, right? But that was a fairly straightforward watch. And yes, he created the duality and he created the Grand Petit Sonnery as well. But it's simplicity that really is the showcase for his finishing techniques in particular.
100%.
But to do it on a double axis tourbillon at that level, there was no one finishing, there was no one making double axis tourbillons.
Well, yeah, in any case, yeah.
At that point, I think, okay, maybe there was pressure and then Jaeger was coming out with it. There's something in the wind, but nothing was finished at that level. So to combine these two things was just absolutely nuts. So talk to me also, because we have this emergence of wanting to adapt complications to be meaningful to a wristwatch, right? And I guess that first watch, the double tourbillon 30 degrees, was the response. Like how meaningful was it to them to be like, you know what, we're not going to repeat the past, we're going to write the future.
So actually, I believe that the sort of validation of that approach that started in 1999 actually came much later, which was in 2011. So
I love that.
And even today, like there's still sort of this notion where like, oh, a tourbillon doesn't really do anything, and like it's cool and all that, but it's kind of useless.
Yes.
But in 2011, there was something called the International Chronometry Competition, which doesn't exist anymore. I think they stopped a few years back. But basically, it was they put the double tourbillon technique to the test. So it was independently tested over the course of, I believe it was like a month or so. So you had shock testing, magnetic field, heat and cold, and the whole thing. And they submitted it, and they had no idea how that's going to go. But it turned out that like over the entire course of those tests, it was between zero point 0.3 and 0.8 seconds a day, which means that basically, you were talking about quartz watches before, it was as precise as the first quartz watches on the market. And so
Incredible.
only all those years later, their sort of, I would say, their intuition was kind of validated. And that's, I think that's something that we're all most proud of, that, what we had promised early on, we were actually able to deliver on that. And it just took a little while for people to kind of appreciate and understand what that actually meant. So I think that a result like this is absolutely incredible. Even in today's standards, like, you don't really get that kind of level of precision.
I mean, totally. And I love that you brought up the Concours International de la Chronometrie, and I long for competitions like this so much. I kind of feel like I almost want to restart it with Revolution,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
potentially with Kosk, because Andreas Weiss, who's the CEO of Kosk, is like he's totally down as well. Right. So just for the audience, for you guys to understand, the Concours International de la Chronometrie was an open competition for watchmakers throughout the realm to submit their watch, which would be horrifically torture tested, and they would see after a month which one was left standing and which one was the most accurate. In 2009, I think was the first one, right? I think that
I don't know about that anymore.
Nydegger won with a tourbillon master. I think it was the master tourbillon. It was a funny watch because it was a tourbillon that was one of the most accessibly priced at the time, and so everyone that was traditionally tourbillon maker was like, Jerome Lambert, your tourbillon is too cheap. What is wrong with you? And then I think he felt compelled to then submit it. And then I think second place was the gyro tourbillon, which is a double axis tourbillon.
Okay.
Now, in 2011, you guys entered and you smashed it with the double tourbillon technique, which I absolutely love. And this is, to me, the only moment where so many independent watchmakers and so many watchmakers in general claim to have created the next chapter in the evolution of chronometric history. This is an example of someone really putting their money where their mouth is and saying, you know what, I'm just going to prove it to you, and here's my watch.
And I was going to say, they didn't even put their mouth where their money was, because how many times do you hear, oh, we have this revolutionary new thing where pushing the limits of the whatever. And given that their goal was never to have a brand or to start a brand, we never did any marketing whatsoever. So it's such a niche thing, but it's such a huge achievement, right? But it was never even communicated. The same thing with our EWT. It's our in-house R&D wing. So EWT stands for Experimental Watch Technology. And so today we have 10 inventions and close to 70 patents, of which we have never even used half. And that's something that, Robert and Steve, they've never even talked about that. But it's incredible, right? But it's not. It's just something that's being done out of passion and because someone needs to do it, basically. And so also there's within that R&D wing, they have something called fundamental research, and that's research without having any kind of product in mind. So it's just free of any kind of constraints. And if it works out and we were able to build a watch with the new technology, we do, and more often than not, it's just learning about watchmaking as a whole, which I find incredible. I'm a huge fan of this approach.
It's so cool, and it's I remember I did a symposium during Geneva Watch Days where I asked the question, if a global EMP was to wipe out all electronic timekeeping in the world, but we still had to have the planes, the boats, the train system, everything still run, right? And you need timekeepers to be accurate in order to do that. What watches would you rely on? And I would have to say, personally, I think Greubel Forsey would have to be one of those key answers. I love what you're talking about, experimental watch technology as well, because I remember seeing incredible stuff. I think you guys did diamond coated silicon as a material at one point. And then obviously some of this stuff has made its way into the commercially available watches. We have seen rapid rotational speed tourbillons that are inclined. I think one of the most interesting watches I've seen recently was the Cardon, which instead of following the normal rotational pathway of a tourbillon, traces its own kind of pathway as well, this kind of crazy elliptical pathway.
Yeah.
And this is always so that to ensure the balance wheel is never in the same position. So it's just such awesome stuff.
And then also, like speaking of the cardinal, like the interest is purely technical in a way, always to improve performance. But in the end, you end up with something which is aesthetically just amazing to look at.
Dude, dude.
And then if we go back to the finishing, like there's we talk about movement architecture. So the whole movement is built in order to showcase that architecture, which then in turn allows us to showcase hand finishing at the highest level. So it's absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
100%, dude. This is the cool thing is that in the end, we ended up incorporating not so much like complete watches into the TV episode, but like looking into the movements as if they were works of architecture. And I know you actually have a tourbillon called the Architecture, because despite the fact that they were created for a chronometric purpose, they are, from my perspective, so stunning to look at, right? And then once that application of extraordinary finesse in terms of finishing is endowed, you have things that are just, they're almost indescribable how beautiful they are. Like one of my favorite timepieces that you guys create is the double incline balance wheel watch with a differential and a 4.5 minute remontoir d'égalité, which is just insanely stunning. And when you realize it's just basically the movement itself that is so damn beautiful, right?
And that's the best example because for us, we don't really have a movement and then a dial or a design around it. So the design or the aesthetics of the watch is just the movement. And so to kind of render something purely technical, mechanical, beautiful is the challenge for us, basically. And I think it's quite rare because it's not about, we never skeletonize, so it's not about kind of open working things and taking material away. It's actually just built in 3 dimensions, and what you're looking at is just the movement as it has to be. So the double balancier also, that's one of our inventions. So it's very exciting to render mechanics beautiful, basically.
Absolutely. And I think that you do that superbly. The one last thing before we get into the fundamentals of the episode and, of course, your story with Greubel Forsey as well, is I just have to talk about how you are also the most innately human enterprise of all the kind of watchmaking maisons I've been to, right? I also know you've been quite transparent about the fact that it's not a massively successful commercial enterprise because you have slavish devotion to quality. When I first went there, I think it was 100 people and 100 watches, right? That means 100 people making 100 watches a year, which basically means one dude is making 1 watch per year.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
right.
Yeah,
And
now a little
maybe,
bit better now, but still, it still is completely ridiculous.
So maybe you can also tell me a little bit why it was Robert and Stephen's kind of like ethos to be like, you know what? We're just going to let people work to the very best of their ability with zero compromise. And it's just going to take as long as it takes.
Again, it was never about making money or having a brand. Like if you want to make money in watches, you would never put in that much effort as we do. And that kind of is reflected throughout, like even our atelier, our manufacturer, it's not a factory. It probably couldn't be less, it's not very efficient the way it's built. But the idea was to just have a workplace where you can feel really, really good because it's quite challenging to work at this level, especially in terms of hand finishing. Like to do that day in, day out is not easy. And so you should be in an environment which makes you feel good and which is not you don't have to rush things. It's about doing something which we consider to be important. For every new project, basically we ask ourselves, does this watch deserve to exist? And it's not about we're making watches and selling them. In terms of what we do make and what we do sell, all of this is basically pumped back into R&D. So there's a lot of lovely watch brands out there, but given that we're independent with Robert and Stephen being the only shareholders, that allows us to explore projects which elsewhere would just not be approved by anyone, right? So I'm thinking about the Handmade series, where the effort required to do something like this is just so colossal that if you're in a position where you have to show quarterly results and all that, you just wouldn't even start doing anything like that. So
Oh,
it's
okay, you brought up the handmade. I kind of feel we need to talk about this then.
all right.
Um,
Let's talk about
okay,
it.
so for those of you out there, the handmade is a timepiece that intentionally regresses to pre-industrial times when there were no computer-driven tools. They were all hand-driven or handmade themselves. And the technology for this or the know-how for this didn't exist at all when you guys decided to embark on this journey. So why? Why did you decide to take on this almost Herculean and impossible challenge?
I mean, so as we mentioned before, with the electronic watch crisis, a lot of these skills have disappeared, and today they're not necessarily taught in schools because I guess the schools, their responsibility is to teach their students what they're going to need in their professional career. But if no one is doing this kind of work, it doesn't really make sense to teach it, right? And it's not something you can learn from a book. It's the best way is kind of from a like an apprenticeship kind of point of view. And we found that the best and probably the only way to preserve these kinds of skills is to keep practicing them. So that was something that started actually in 2006 with the creation of Time Eon Foundation, where the idea was to preserve, safeguard, and transmit these very traditional skills and this traditional kind of knowledge. And then came the Nations du Monde 1, where we had worked with Philip Dufour to have a handmade timepiece, but that was a while back as well. And then what happened was there's quite a few guys internally who were like, oh, instead of programming a CNC machine, I can actually make something. There was this interest in doing this kind of work. And so we built a whole workshop around it now. And the reason for us is again to just keep practicing them, learn new skills, and then transmit them to other, even to other brands actually, and to other people within Greubel Forsey. So it's more of a romantic endeavor than anything else. But I think it's one of the most beautiful things that we're doing today.
It couldn't come at a better time. It was interesting because in 2014 we had the launch of the Apple Watch, right? And so there was this just very genuine fear that the watch industry was going to face another existential crisis, and this would replace, mechanical watchmaking. Incredibly, quite the opposite
I was
happened.
going to say that the opposite, didn't it? Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, the next generation fell in love even more with mechanical watchmaking and actually even more with artisanship and métier d'art and everything that was innately human. Like Carl Fritz Schäufele, who's the son of Carl Friedrich, who is the co-CEO and owner of Chopin. He said he entered into one of the AI engines. What is the value of human craftsmanship in the future? And it spat back to him as like it will potentially be more valuable than diamonds or gold, right?
Okay.
And that's very interesting. And so for you to create the most human made, the most handmade watch conceivable, you're creating something that potentially has a greater value than any material cost of anything that goes into it. It's the skill, it's the human artistry. And
Yeah.
that's the thing that's irreplaceable because we are at a very interesting tipping point where many of the maybe less skilled functions in everything will be replaced by machines soon.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that we went to pre-industrial levels, and I want to say that, yeah, but then also like Breguet, for example, he made how many watches overall? Like a ton, right? But what we try to do is have a handmade watch, but to the same sort of quality criteria as any other grip Forsey would
Right,
be.
right.
So basically, it's machining to within microns, but doing it by hand. And I don't think that anything like that has ever existed.
No.
And it's kind of counterintuitive because when you think handmade, you feel like, there's like, you're hammering on it and it's all kind of rough. But it's in the end, it's just a beautifully made and finished timepiece. And the approach, even though like we do use traditional machines and all that, but this kind of approach, I don't think has necessarily existed. And again, what's interesting, Robert and Steven, they had this idea basically in 2006, right? And Handmade One came out in 2019. So it's incredible the sort of patience and resilience that they have in pursuing projects such as this.
It's really extraordinary, and like I said, it couldn't come at a better time. Especially now that I really am a little terrified sometimes by how like the world we're going to be in 10 years from now or 20 years from now, where everything will be super automated and we will be increasingly less relevant. But to have something that is so innately human is completely its own thing. Because you're right, there were watches that were made in the pre-industrial time, but they were never finished to the level of a Greubel Forsey, and also they were also not pursuing the same level of chronometric performance, as well, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So you have like this perfect, like sort of like a watch that combines three extraordinary values. Really, a strong pursuit of meaningful watchmaking in terms of the pursuit of chronometry, proven by your win in 2011 at the Concours International, the chronometry. Unrivaled finishing, honestly. And I know finishing's become very trendy, right? And I would say probably the only two guys that I can think of that are finished, or the only two entities that are finishing at the highest level possible, are yourselves and probably Akrivia and Recep as well.
Yeah.
But to be fair, and with respect to Recep, you guys got there in 2004, and this is something that he started to do, more recently, right?
I mean, the challenge for us with finishing today is basically to have that standard across almost 200 timepieces per year now. So, if we could, if we'll be doing 10, that would be fine, right? But between, I want to say like an entry level, if an entry level Greubel Forsey, if I may, and then like a Grand Sonnery, there is no difference in terms of the effort put in hand finishing. So that's really today, that's kind of one of the challenges that we do have. Since you mentioned that it's like a thing today, and hand finishing is being taken a little bit more seriously. So we've started, basically, we have a department now which is R&D, but just for hand finishing, just to
Wow.
see, how can what's going to be the next level of doing that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that too, because when I look at your timepieces, like they're extraordinarily well finished, but you don't get sometimes what has become a little bit of a cliche in terms of hand finishing. You know what I mean? Where you're trying to, like, you're
Yeah.
not trying to make as many inner angles as conceivably possible because it's frivolous, right? It's not, of course,
Yeah,
where
I know
they,
what you mean. Yeah, yeah.
yes, where they naturally occur, where they're meaningful, of course, that's amazing. But, there, like, sometimes this hand finishing, this whole idea of hand finishing has been co-opted a little bit as a marketing message, and then you have, brands trying to make as many angles as possible, and I like it when it's meaningful, and you certainly are a perfect expression of that. Okay, we established that we were not going to really focus that much on full watches. And really talk about the human story. We also mentioned that there was a big question mark as to whether or not Robert would actually show up for the shooting of this
Sure.
episode. And I want our listeners to understand this is real. And I was kind of at some point pretty terrified about this because, we kind of like activated the entire production for this. We're headed towards this objective, and it all kind of hinges on. And we remember we'd even had conversations, Michelle, about okay, so what do we do if he doesn't show up? How do we tie together the episode?
Yeah, yeah,
And we
exactly.
had like Plan B and Plan C, but Plan A was that obviously that we would meet him. So I also want to mention that maybe each of the episodes that you see, in many instances, have a little bit of their own stylistic vibe. Oftentimes, kind of a tribute to other television programs or even movies, right? So, if you look at Max Bucer's, it starts off in the madhouse, and there's a whole Ed Wood kind of vibe to it as well. That kind of Tim Burton, Ed Wood.
All right, all right.
And then with Francois Paul, there is. I mean, it's hard to replicate Coppola, although he does appear in the Francois Paul Journe episode. But obviously The Godfather is kind of a reference point, right? It's kind of funny because I don't know who came up with. Oh yeah, I think it was Karen, the showrunner, co-executive producer, and co-creator, who came up with an opening credit sequence in for the Chopard episode that's kind of lifted from Dynasty, right?
Oh, okay, okay.
So it's the whole idea is to set up this impossibly glamorous family, but then reveal that they have this extraordinary work ethic, which is very different from Dynasty, obviously. But for our episode, we kind of did an homage to Easy Rider because it's like a motorcycle odyssey. And so let's talk a little bit about motorcycles because you learned through your relationship with Robert, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, he's the one who taught me how to ride a bike. I don't know when that was, but I was a younger man than I am now, I guess. But that's all I wanted. I actually got a car, my first car, fairly recently. But the first thing I wanted was to have a motorcycle, and he was always into Harleys actually, and I got my first Triumph, I guess, when I was 18, as soon as I can ride.
Nice.
And so that was, yeah, that was just like an activity that we did together. Like back then, it was, I did not realize or fully realize or appreciate who he was and what he was doing. It was
Right.
just, and I also remember we went on, I think we went on vacation once, and he was testing the Grand Sonnery at that time, because that also took years and years to develop. And I remember we were in the plane, and he was sitting like 3 rows and 2 seats in front of me, and I can hear the Grand Sonnery on his wrist. But for me, it's like, that was fine. I didn't know what that even what that was. And so yeah, that's what we rode motorcycles, and talking about motorcycles, and that was kind of the basis of our relationship, I would say.
That's awesome. So I know he's a Harley guy. So did you learn how to ride on a Harley?
I did, but he has one of those. I don't know what you call the thing in the front where it's all like butter, where you don't really have
Oh,
a
a Springer.
suspension,
A Springer.
and so that's just a little bit too freaky for me. I can't ride
Yeah.
that. That
Yeah.
scares me a little bit.
Yeah, those are terrible. I mean, they look really cool, but they're not easy to ride.
Yeah,
Yeah, so obviously I love motorcycles as well, and since I have a couple of vintage bikes, this felt like the perfect opportunity for us to get together and go for a motorcycle ride, as kind of like this epic journey towards meeting the mythical Robert Greubel. Now, we mentioned how we have this love for mechanical systems and old school mechanical systems, but we didn't realize that this this meant that one of my first motorcycle, which I started the episode on, would turn potentially into a Molotov cocktail.
yeah, we should do it. Yeah, indeed.
I start off on one of my favorite bikes is a Norton Commando. So I'm lucky enough to have a 1972 Norton Commando. It's got original paint on it, but therein lies the problem because Norton Commandos or these roadsters had fiberglass tanks. So it's an original paint bike, which is really rare, but it means the tank is original. And after 50 something years, gas is leaking through the tank. And by the time I made it out to Neuchâtel, it was just a deluge of gas. So much so that I tried to
Yeah,
stuff a rag around the petcock. That was like the fifth thing to go wrong with it on the ride over. Like the first thing was like the what is it? This is like the lug nut that connects the header to the head fell
right.
off. And then, and
God.
then Mike, who's a mechanic, he had brought my second bike, which was a '67 Triumph, which is actually very similar to your bike. So you're kind of a Triumph guy, correct?
Yeah, yeah. Because I don't really like sports bikes and all that. I just want to have a smooth, like you said, easy rider. That's kind of my thing. I just
Yeah,
want to have
just
a
like a
good
cruise.
time, and it's not necessarily about speed and all that. But actually, I don't think I told you before the show. My bike was at the shop as well, and because I was a little bit scared because it was sitting around for a few months, and then I picked it up like what was it? I don't know which day did we start shooting. Was it like a Monday or something?
I think so. Yeah.
So I was there on Saturday, and I picked it up, and it was all good. And I drove maybe like 500 meters, and then it broke down, and I was like, "Oh my god," and there was no gas, and so I was in the middle of nowhere, like I was literally like next to a field,
Oh
and
wow.
and then I got back and got some gas. I was a little bit angry with the mechanic who didn't put gas in there, and I filled it up, and it didn't work. It didn't work either, and so
Right.
then he got it back, and then he just basically flushed through the gas tank, and he said it was all fine. Which afterwards we saw that it wasn't.
Yeah. This would be a recurring theme for our episode was motorcycles breaking down, right? Like,
Yeah, but how lucky were we though that we were able to finish the shoot, and then my
oh
bike
yeah.
broke down. Was it like 5 minutes before we reached Robert's farmhouse?
It,
That
it,
was
it
that was
was
incredible. I can't believe it made it all the way through.
amazingly both of our bikes hold up. You've got is it a Triumph Scrambler?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
Okay.
but it's not
Uh,
like it's an '07 basically, so it's a little bit older, but not the same as yours.
Nice. Actually, that's cool because it's exactly mine says 67, so it's exactly 40 years difference,
Oh yeah,
right?
you actually
Right.
look at that.
So I've got a '67 Triumph TR6C, which is a scrambler basically, right? It's they call them a desert sled. It's a type of bike that Steve McQueen used to ride out. He's
Yeah.
just so cool, ride out in the desert in California. And so this thing was remarkable because it just held up the entire time. We make it to the top of the Vue des Alpes, which is a pass in the Alps, very beautiful, very scenic. And I know at this point you'd kind of been texting Robert, but until he kind of showed up, I didn't know if this was going to actually happen.
Oh,
And
neither
then,
did I, honestly.
and then we hear this unmistakable rumble of a Harley Davidson, and we turn around and we see your mom Silva, who's Robert's wife, and Robert on his Springer Harley. And I love Robert's outfit also. He's got a stunning Harley, and then I think he was wearing like a leather jacket and like tennis shorts or
Oh yeah,
something like.
yeah.
Yeah, like
That's kind of his Harley riding attire. Yeah.
I love it. Well, I always find it cool when guys wear like shorts on Harleys in summertime, right? I can do it on my Triumph, but on my Harley because it's just too hot. Right?
Oh yeah, you can't do that. Yeah.
But he was fine, and then he showed up, and it was like extraordinary. And I have to say, like the other thing I didn't realize was just what a warm and kind of just nice dude he is.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
and your mom is awesome, incidentally. She's such a dynamic woman. And I remember
Love you,
we
mom.
we go down to the farmhouse, and it's very funny because one of the questions I was asking, and you learn that they just love to live in this very beautiful, kind of rustic and very in their own ways modest like farmhouse, at one with nature. And I remember asking your mom Silva like how she and Robert met, and she said like I guess they I think they met online or something like that, and they went for their first date, and in some ways she was kind of unimpressed.
Oh no, she's still not impressed to this day. Like, doesn't give a shit
Oh,
though.
I see. So she has, yeah. So she has the same relationship with Robert that my wife has with me.
Someone's
Like
got to keep you in check, right? I mean, come on.
so, and I remember, he was saying, "Oh, have you heard of Greubel Forsey?" And she was like, "Nope." and and I remember saying, "Well, like, what made you kind of fall in love with Robert?" And she told this really remarkable story, and it was actually something that you guys do, which I wasn't even aware of, right? So she said that she went on a vacation together with Robert. They went to, I think it was Morocco,
That's right.
and there were so many kids that were like just starving, basically. And so on kind of a whim, Robert just went to, I think it was like a McDonald's or someplace like that, and just bought as much food as he could, and he brought it outside, and the kids were so desperate that they just started grabbing it, and things were falling all over the place, and Robert and your mom were so distraught, but it motivated them incredibly enough to create their own foundation, the Adenium Foundation. So tell me, what is that?
Basically, it's kind of a way of giving back because everything's not a commercial exercise per se compared to other brands or other industries. But in the end, it is. It's like you go to work and you have your salary, and at the end of the day you sell something, right? But the idea was to kind of balance that with something which is just kind of purely to help other people. And especially, in this industry where there's a lot of excess sometimes, and sometimes the luxury industry gets a bit of a bad rep as well. But the idea was to have something which is completely separate, and we also don't talk about that too much. But it's just to help other people. In this instance, it was to help kids.
Michelle, it's incredible because I've been doing Revolution for 20 years. I've been in the watch industry or as a journalist for 25 years. I never knew about this foundation at all, right? And it was, I only,
We don't talk about it because if we would, then it's like, oh, we have this foundation and it's the Greubel Forsey Foundation and all that, and then it becomes like a marketing thing, which was never the idea. So it is a bit of a more discreet, and some of the money from Greubel Forsey goes directly to the foundation as well.
I mean, that's awesome, man. Like we talk a lot about like the responsibility of having the right ethics in this business. And I think some people make, a little bit more effort than others. It's so cool to know that you guys were doing this for, in such a nice way. This is incidentally the foundations to help children in need. And it was cool because, until I learned about this, and then, we asked, obviously, do you guys have any of a video that we can insert to just illustrate what this is?
Yeah, we barely have anything actually, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's amazing because I guess you've never really talked about it publicly, but you were kind enough to give us some footage, and it was remarkable because to see Robert interacting with the kids, right, and like just how happy he
Yeah.
is it's so touching. And I guess what I really like is that your mom and Robert, like they fell in love through this good act, and that's an incredible bond to have in a relationship.
Yeah.
The other thing I discovered on the farm was that male peacocks are extremely protective.
Yeah, they are.
I love how you guys are raising peacocks over there. And then just before about to go into the peacock enclosure, they're like, so the male peacock is going to attack you. And I'm like, oh, is it me personally? And they're like, is he racist?
I've never heard of racist peacocks, but yeah.
They're like, no, it's just the male peacock feels every male is a threat. And so we actually have to be quite careful in there.
Yeah.
And then it was remarkable to see that I think upstairs in the barn that there was actually eggs, and then there's actually two female peacocks taking turns to sort of like keep the eggs warm. And it's just almost a bit of a disconnect for me because the absolute price point of your watches is high because of the immense amount of work that goes into them, right? And the immense amount of research and development. But it's kind of like there's that world, and then there's this world where how does Robert enjoy himself? He just hangs out the farm. He checks on the peacocks. Right? And that's
we're normal people in the end, right? Like,
yeah.
and even like at the office, we just we want to have fun. You spend half your life at work anyway, and
Yeah.
regardless of what kind of work you're doing, you can just have a good time as well, and be kind of. I guess we like to be able to look at ourselves in the mirror also every night and every morning, and
Yeah.
that kind of lifestyle really does help.
Yes. I mean, it's so. I guess the term in Switzerland is your feet are on the ground. There's a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
intentional humility there because it keeps you rooted. And I think that there's it's that whole Calvinist spirit where it's like don't have your head in the clouds. And I really like that. And I think we've seen a lot of those cautionary tales where people get too lost in success, and it never ends up well. So then the incredible thing was really the only conversation about watchmaking that happens as I'm helping, and I say helping because I didn't really do all that much, but helping Robert prepare the fondue, right?
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't.
Which took much longer than it would normally take, right?
Well, okay, so this is the thing, right? Because so just for for those of you out there who haven't hung out with me, I am probably the greatest like non-Swiss lover of cheese fondue that exists. Like I am obsessed with fondue. I actually can eat fondue in 40-degree heat. I don't care. And I could eat fondue like every single day that I'm in Switzerland. I also don't care. And my favorite is moitié moitié, which is half Gruyere. Although there's some complexity to that because you can even mix different ages of Gruyere and then half a Vacherin Fribourgeois. Although I know there's another version which we never got around to trying because somehow it vanished.
100% vegetable. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So the way in which you make fondue is pretty elemental. You have liquid, which is usually champagne or white wine, but Robert prefers champagne, and it brings a kind of nice lightness to it. Now, it was really interesting because the way in which he approaches watchmaking is to have things take as long as they take, right? Now, with his approach to fondue, this is the first time I've seen someone basically try to, or no, not try because he was successful, make fondue with zero cornstarch, right? Cornstarch is used as a binding agent, so that so then you can kind of use a low heat, but eventually it will keep everything together. He's almost doing it intentionally is in a way that's as difficult as possible. And so the only way to get the cheese to bind together is to do it at a heat that's so ridiculously low, it's almost like you're using a light bulb.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah,
have to have
exactly.
this crazy patience and crazy dedication to just stirring the pot for about 40 minutes, right? And he did, you know?
Yeah, and that's kind of there's a beauty in this process, I suppose. You kind of enjoy it. It's almost like meditation in a way, I suppose.
It's just a wonderful thing because it's just like, okay, the only end goal is quality. And even the difference in taste is probably going to be, for someone that loves fondue, detectable, but maybe 20%, right? But that 20% is worth the however long it takes
Yeah.
because it's better, right? And so I absolutely love that. And then, and then of course it didn't hurt that we had multiple glasses of champagne as this was transpiring.
Yes, indeed. Oh, I remember that.
Yes. And then, we went out onto the terrace and it was really a wonderful moment because I remember you went to get the special guest for the evening, which was Stephen Forsey,
Forsey,
right?
yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your relationship with Stephen because I know you talk a lot about him being a big part of your education as well.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started working for Greubel Forsey officially, I was lucky enough to spend almost 5 years basically next to Stephen. I was doing PR back in the day. So it was for RTA visits and all that. It was basically just listening to him speak, and I didn't really, sometimes it was frustrating because I never spoke, I never contributed anything, and I was like basically serving coffee on the side. But I was really, you know how like for sushi you have, when you want to start making sushi, like the first years you just wash rice, right?
Yeah.
Then you kind of have to perfect the
Yeah.
washing rice part to then go to the next level. And I feel like it was kind of like that.
Right.
And I didn't realize back then how valuable that was going to be. And even today, it's sometimes like, I feel like I know my shit with given the history and all that. And I'm feeling very confident. But then when I talk to Stephen, I'm just like, damn, there's so much knowledge there, and a sort of depth in the approach. So yeah, those 5 years were really really important, and I don't think I could really do what I do today without having spent so much time with Robert and with Stephen as well. I feel like we do things a little bit differently, and it's a very philosophical approach to watchmaking and to everything basically. So it was important to have that kind of not passed down, but to be able to absorb their ideas of watchmaking.
Yeah, I have to say it was such a heartwarming moment to have them both in front of us and having a fondue together. And clearly, there's so much sort of brotherhood between the two of those guys as well. And they're both, it's interesting too because traditionally in one of those watch brands that has two names, right? Like Jaeger LeCoultre, right?
Mhm.
You have one dude that's the watchmaker and the other dude that's the businessman. You know what I mean? But in Greubel Forsey, you got two dudes that are like the technical geniuses.
Yeah,
you know
100%.
and and so you understand this kind of crazy devotion to creativity, to finishing, to doing things that honestly from a commercial perspective make zero sense, but yet at the end it's valuable from a cultural perspective more than anything else, like handmade one and now handmade two as well. And look what you've created also with Naissance du Montre. We now have the Berthoud Chopard watch that's come out as well, which is beautiful.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, kudos to those guys as well. Talk to me a little bit about your story. I think it's going to be your 10th anniversary next year, right? You joined in
My
2016.
personal,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. So talk to me about your story in terms of like your kind of your calling, if I may say, like how you felt like you actually could contribute meaningfully to Greubel Forsey. What your early years were like, what we talked about, your apprenticeship, your Jiro dreams of sushi, rice washing like with Stephen, and then you becoming CEO and what your personal objectives are for this incredible maison.
I mean, I don't know if there's a story to be told there. The plan was never for me to even work here. And I remember there was a time where we kind of talked about it, but I didn't really like the idea because we had a family relationship basically. And I didn't want to, I was afraid that, I was always going to be, oh, that's I'm only here because of that relationship. And I knew it was going to be much harder for me to prove myself. Because of that. But one thing led to another. I think in the very beginning, I was helping out because actually no one spoke English.
Mm.
As simple as that. And then like it was helpful. And then I want to say like one thing led to another, I suppose. Ended up, doing all kinds of things and enjoying it more and more. And before that, I was doing like online marketing for a big telecommunications company, which was not super interesting. But here it's incredible because it's like you actually get to contribute to something and you actually see as a sort of direct result of your effort, which can be great or, success or the opposite of that. But I really, really appreciate that. And it's kind of like I want to say it's like a drug working here. Everyone's just a little bit crazy in their own way. And I haven't looked back since. I mean, it's 10 years officially now. And so yeah, I couldn't really imagine working anywhere else apart from here. Like, where would I go, right? This is, I'm very fortunate to be able to be here and contribute in my way. In terms of vision, I want to say whatever vision I would have, I feel like it's irrelevant because Robert and Steven's vision is already like, important enough. So basically the idea is to be able to kind of move forward on what they had on the sort of base or the foundation that they had set, and to make that sustainable in the long term. It's as simple as that.
Well, it's very cool. I mean, I know you mentioned that you were self-conscious about the fact that there was a family relationship there, but another way of looking at it is actually, it's this is an interesting moment in the watch industry because the next generation for all, a lot of these brands is coming in and they're really contributing each in their own way as well. Like I mentioned, Carl Fritz and Caroline Marie Schäufele at Chopin. Obviously, there's Alex and Amanda Mill at Richard Mill as well. I mean, even Jean Arnaud in his own way as well. I think he's done a rather incredible job actually at both Vuitton, but also Daniel Roth and Gerald Genta. So it really is a nice moment for generational change. And I would just say that it's a very natural progression to have you be the leader of that company. Who else?
Yeah, but I didn't know back then. I didn't realize that because I thought this was a company, so you can just get someone to run a company. But I'm realizing now that coming from the outside, if you haven't kind of lived in this environment, you can't really take any kind of business model and apply it to Greubel Forsey. Which is only like recently I'm like, okay, this is actually like it makes more sense now than it did 10 years ago. I didn't realize the depth of what's being done here. So that's why in the end it turned out to be very helpful to have this personal relationship with Robert and having learned from Stephen for so many years. I guess it requires a bit of nuance in terms of how we approach things.
Absolutely. But then again, also, because watchmaking is interesting because you're in fact in the best brands, right? You're dealing with extraordinary creative personalities as well, right? And who don't necessarily want to do like sales projections or cash flow reports and stuff like that as well. So for you to be able to straddle both worlds and have a really innate understanding of the primary creators and creator, of everything moving forward is really unique. I've seen very, very few instances where someone who is outside of the family or out of the business can be kind of parachuted in and run it successfully. In fact, usually that's a recipe for disaster, honestly. Right?
But I get it. Like it's difficult, difficult to manage. Yeah.
I got to ask you also what we can expect from you guys in the future. I think one timepiece that was pretty mind blowing, obviously from a technical perspective, because it's a foudroyant but on a tourbillon cage. I think a flying tourbillon cage, and then on which attached to powering a chronograph, but was also related to its size, right? Like because there has always maybe in the past been a perception of Greubel Forsey being pretty substantial watches in terms of size, and this was it 37.8? Was that the size?
37.9. Yeah. It's a 38 millimeter basically. Yeah.
Right. And this was kind of like there's almost no one creating immensely ambitious technical watches in that size, right? And is this something that we're going to be seeing more of in the future? I mean, can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, of course. I mean, for the nano, that's a whole sort of series of projects in and by itself. Our personal ambition is to have a 180-day power reserve, basically. Not that
Wow.
anyone is asking for it, but that was, when talking about fundamental research before, that's kind of, in theory, this is something that should work, so why not explore that? So I want to say that the nano is something that, like, where we see a lot of potential. Because if we can build movements in a completely different way, we see that possibilities like having a flyback chronograph flying tourbillon nanofoot round in the 38 millimeters is just something that we wouldn't have been able to do a few years back. But then overall, yeah, we do want to go a little bit slimmer and a little bit smaller. The challenge there being that we always want to have that deep movement architecture, and
Right.
for architecture you need space, right? But I feel like now, there's a few things, on the way for next year and then the year after, where I think it was we've been very successful in actually doing that. What I'm really excited about is that our R&D team is now completely separate from production, and I feel like we should be able to do things a whole lot faster just because of that, because they don't have to wait their turn for using the machines. As if they have an idea, they can prototype it, they can test it, they can go, all the way basically. So that was something that was always, the Grand Sonnery took 11 years, the Nano Food Royant took 10 years. If it's for every project, if it's always such a, monumental task, it's a bit of a challenge. But now I feel like we can also be a little bit more flexible in the way that we work. So that's in the future. I think that's gonna help quite a bit.
So I guess the last question I have for you is, we conceptualize this episode. We talked about kind of going very creative in terms of not really focusing too much on watches at all. Incidentally, we should also shout out Marwa as well, because she was very much involved in the
Sure.
whole,
Yeah.
this whole episode.
Absolutely.
And then we went through the kind of anxiety-inducing, at least in my case, concern that Robel might not show up, but he did,
Yeah.
and it was incredible. I just want to get your takeaway, because you've seen the episode now. Like, what are your thoughts?
I love the intro because I'm a huge fan of Anthony Bourdain, and like it reminded me of his intro that he used to have, and I was like, oh shit, that was really really cool. And then I love how easygoing it all is. Like we were just, in the end, we're just talking, riding
Yeah.
motorcycles, having fun. We're not doing anything special or anything, completely crazy, right? But I found it to be very, and I've seen it twice now, and I know like, we were doing it, and I was in the moment, but it's really nice to see. And as you mentioned, like that human aspect of it, I think it really comes through quite nicely. And I thought it was incredible actually that you know, you can tell that we didn't really have a script. And just like as we don't now, I don't think have we ever done an interview or anything where we had a script? I don't think so. We
Nope.
usually just wing it. And as we did for the episode, which is a bit more high risk, right? But I think it works out because it's whatever you see, it's authentic.
It's interesting, and thank you so much for the Anthony Bourdain, comment. He was and still continues to be a massive, massive inspiration, and he's one of my heroes, like really big heroes. It was interesting because I think we both discussed how I think if we actually were invested and enjoyed the conversations we were having, whether it was the two of us or with your mom and with Greubel or with Stephen, that we hoped that the conversations would be enjoyable to an audience. And I sometimes feel if you try to force meaning too much, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
If meaning comes out through the fact that we're actually enjoying the conversation and we're maybe even joking around a little bit,
Yeah.
but it comes across a little bit more in a sincere way. And that's what I really like about our episode. It's funny you mentioned Anthony Bourdain, but I remember I would put on his TV show sometimes just to relax.
Oh, same. So it was before going to sleep. It was always Anthony Bourdain. Yeah.
Right, because it just took you down, and it was just something like effortlessly kind of charming about listening to good conversations, and because they were sincere about what they were talking about, and food was kind of the way in, but it became about human beings, and
Yeah.
I think you made the right decision ultimately to say, like, watches are maybe a little bit of the way in, but in the end, let's just make it a story about human beings. So I want to thank you for that as well, buddy.
No, but thank you. It was incredible. And also, when the few times that we did have to do like a second take of something, like we didn't repeat the conversation, we just had a different conversation, that second or third take. But yeah, also, your team is incredible, and the way that they put everything together is super impressive.
Thank you. And, wishing you all the best. Thank you so much for joining me, and to our
Thank
audience,
you.
guys. We both hope you enjoyed the episode. Michelle, much love to you, and to Mawa, and to your
Thank
mom,
you.
Stephen and Robert as well. All right.
All right.
Take care, brother.
Thank you so much.
After Hours is brought to you by The Hourglass. The Hourglass is the ultimate showcase for artisanal independent brands and watchmakers such as Daniel Roth, François Paul Journe, MBNF, and Recep Recep'i. Visit one of their 70 boutiques across 15 cities in the Asia Pacific or learn more at thehourglass.com.